welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst, and today we're going to continue our discussion of James Garlow's book, Well Versed, the chapter on Social Security. And if you remember last time, I talked about some of the areas that I agreed with what he was saying about Social Security, but then there were other areas that I disagreed with him, mainly the idea that Social Security is an entitlement program. That's what he seems to be pointing at. He seems to be coming at it from the perspective of it's a redistribution of resources to the elderly, which I disagree with. And I argued last time that Social Security is a savings program and that you can't classify it as the same thing as, say, food stamps, Section 8 housing, and all kinds of welfare entitlement programs. It's not that. It's actually a pay into program. So you're paying into a fund that will then be available in 40 or 50 years when you are able to draw on it at 67 right now is the current retirement age. You're able to draw at it at 67. So if you've worked 40 or 50 years, you can stop working full-time and start drawing from your paid into pension, government-administered pension, which is Social Security. I wanted to talk more about what he was saying in this chapter. He has a chapter entitled Social Security. Makes sense. It's about halfway through the book. And again, he says a lot of good things. Let's start with this quote. He says, with the Social Security Act of 1935, the government stepped outside of its prescribed role and into areas it had no right to enter. Okay, so he's saying that strictly speaking, according to the Bible, Romans 13, you can read it, it talks about government being there to reward those who are good and punish those who are bad. In other words, basically, law and order was the main function of government, to keep government with order and efficiency and allowing people to basically buy and sell and go about their business in an orderly, safe way. You also have armies, you have military for that same purpose, to maintain the defense of the territory and protect the citizens. You have police force and so on and so forth. So it's basically boils around justice and the administration of justice. And he's saying the Social Security Act of 1935 was a violation of the basic core purpose of government. Well, it certainly isn't a function of the core of government. He's correct there. It stepped outside of the core purpose of government, according to the Bible. But does that mean that it violated the biblical understanding of government? He says at the very end of that sentence, he says, it stepped into an area it had no right to enter. Well, does the Bible actually say that government cannot do things that are not exactly the core of its mission? So in other words, does the Bible actually teach that the government cannot do anything other than its core purpose? No, it doesn't teach that. It teaches what its core purpose is, but it doesn't say that it can't do other things other than the core purpose. And for the purposes of having a sort of a safety net for older people, if a government, and it looks like almost every government on earth at this point, at least in the Western world, and I think most of the third world developing nations are following suit, they're all implementing some kind of old age pension fund that people pay into. So it's a very widespread idea, and it's a very popular idea. It makes a lot of sense. It administers a little discipline into the lives of people, which is a good thing. And if the program is actually followed and administered correctly, it makes a lot of good sense. So I disagree with Pastor Garlow in his assessment that Social Security violates the purpose of government. And he says entering into an area it has no right to enter. Well, no, not necessarily. Again, the core purpose of government is different from Social Security, but it doesn't contradict the core purpose of government in the Bible. So the Bible does not contradict something like Social Security. Now, he does go on further and say that that the purpose for the function of family is supposed to be the basic, you might say, old age insurance for people who cannot work full time anymore because of sickness or just low energy. They're getting old, slowing down, and so they don't have the capacity to work. Say if they're a shopkeeper or if they are working in farming, agriculture, they don't have the capacity to get up early in the morning, milk the cows, and go plow the field and work late and then come home. They don't have the capacity to do that. You can imagine at 68, 70, 75, they don't have the full capacity. Now, his argument in his book is that people are responsible, the family members are responsible for the elderly in their family, sort of like he doesn't bring this illustration up, but I thought of it sort of like the Walton family, where you have like 3 generations, maybe 4 generations of Waltons under the same roof. And they all function together. You got the grandpa out there. He's not probably putting in a full day, but he might be putting in half day helping the father, Walton, John Walton, do his full-time work. And then you have the younger generation helping out, and they're all pitching in together. So the older people, even the grandmother, if you remember the series, grandma helped in the kitchen, helped cook, helped do chores around the house. And so she wasn't, quote, retired in the modern sense. He does point out the fact that, and I believe that this is accurate, the modern notion of retirement, in which there is a period of, say, 20, 30 years after you stop your full-time job, where you basically are leisurely on vacation for 20 or 30 years. That whole notion of the modern concept of retirement is not biblical. That is true. I agree with that totally. There's nowhere in the Bible, and he points this out, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says that at age 65 or now 67, you quit working, quit being productive, you just kick back, you sit back in the living room, you watch TV, you go out to dinner often, you travel around maybe in a RV, like that used to be popular amongst the retirees, where they'd get into an RV and they'd go all around the country and travel and goof off and be on vacation for the next 2 decades. That is not biblical. That is contrary to the Bible. And there's nothing in the Word of God that says that there is some kind of an age point where you stop being a responsible person, stop taking on responsibilities, stop being accountable, and just goofing off and selfishly living in leisure or luxury even sometimes, depending on the amount of your retirement pension or account. There's nothing in the Bible that says that that is the vision for adults. So he's right there. But he also says, and I agree somewhat with this, he says the net effect, more money is being distributed to people for a longer period of time than they were originally anticipated. That's the longevity has increased a lot. and for virtually no economic return. In effect, folks are being paid not to work. So you had back in the 1930s, when Social Security started, the situation that people barely lived much past retirement age. So when they stopped working full time, they maybe had a few more years, couple years, and then they died. That was the life expectancy. So it wasn't meant to have this decades-long period of leisure. And so he's right there. They're being paid not to work. And they are suffering. A lot of elderly have no reason or purpose to get up in the morning other than just to goof off or play around or just to basically make their life a vacation for 20, 30 years. And that's totally contrary to the Bible. And it's not healthy. It's not spiritually healthy. It's not physically healthy. It's not mentally healthy. It's not the way God created people to be. And so he's right. He's right about that. And but he then goes on, and I explained last time that his understanding of retirement is a little bit twisted in the fact that he says that his wife, unfortunately, passed away, and she was 4 months away from collecting Social Security, and she died. And he says it's not fair that now her family doesn't get to collect on the savings that she put in for Social Security. So there's kind of a motivation or a reason behind maybe his attitude towards Social Security. And it's because of his wife's situation that she died 4 months before she was able to collect Social Security. And we can understand that. I mean, if you were in that situation, you would feel pretty bad about the fact that your wife didn't get to reap any of the benefit of all of the contributions she made to Social Security. But then again, that is the way the system works. That's the way insurance works. You can pay insurance, and you can pay thousands and tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands into home insurance and never see a dime of that, because nothing like a major home catastrophe happens, or maybe a fire doesn't happen. Well, is that a bad thing? No, it's a good thing, because that's part of the system. So you're paying in to a system, and some people don't see the benefits of their investment because they die early. Okay, but most people, I would say 99% of the people who do pay into the system, or in the 90 percentile of the people that pay into the system, actually do benefit. They do see some of the fruit of their savings in Social Security, even though some people don't. And his wife wasn't able to see the benefit of her savings. But again, that doesn't mean that the whole system should be scrapped. That would not be fair, totally not be fair, just to leave everybody who's paid in for their every week on their paycheck would be out of the money. No, that would totally be not fair. And the system does provide, not a perfect, but it does provide somewhat of a good way for an older person to have the self-discipline to save and not squander their money during their lifetime, and then not have nothing to fall back onto. Now, he's saying, his argument is, well, children are the Social Security safety net. that it's the role of the children to support the older people in their uh, old age. And he actually said to his kids, and you don't usually hear parents saying this to their children, but it's actually true. It is biblical. It's the way that God teaches in the Bible. It says, he says, I have told my children consistently through their growing years, your mother and I are doing everything we can to provide for you now. We are planning for the day when we cannot work, okay, the day where maybe due to arthritis or injury or some infirmity or just low energy, your just body's wearing out. People get to that point where you can't put in a full day's work, and then maybe you work part-time, and then you can't work part-time, and you work quarter time. And then finally there's a time where you just can't really commit to anything because there might be some days where you just don't feel very good enough to actually get out of the house and so on and so forth. So yeah, the energy level goes down. He says, we're planning for the day that when we cannot work, so we will not burden you. So he's planning on some kind of a retirement account, and you can bet that he has some kind of pension, probably with a denomination or with a church organization or with some kind of ministry, 401k or Roth IRA account. He's got something set up so that he's paid into and disciplined himself to do that. Well, that's a good thing. And so he's planning on not being a burden for his children. However, he said, regardless of the success or failure of our planning, it is ultimately you kids' responsibility to care for your mother and me when we are old. We are counting on you to be there and call us blessed. That's Proverbs. He's quoting, and take care of us. To this day, I remind them, I may be living with you someday. We chuckle about it, and they tease me, but what I'm saying is reality. Biblically, children are to take care of the elderly parents. So, biblically speaking, according to the Word of God, it is the responsibility of the children to take care of the parents in their old age. It isn't responsibility of the government primarily to do that. Now, it is nice to have a system in place if it's administered properly, and it could be administered properly. It can be administered properly. Whether it has been administered properly, that's a question, because whenever you have politicians and leaders and big money, the temptation is to exploit sources of income. And if you look at the Social Security Trust Fund, you will see that, yes, indeed, the government has been borrowing from and essentially plundering the Social Security Trust Fund in the form of the Social Security Trust Fund sells bonds, treasury bills to the government, and then the government spends that money and writes an IOU to the Social Security Trust Fund. Well, that's not really comforting to know that the government has an IOU to the trust fund, because we're already $37 trillion in debt. 38, I think it is, the latest figure. So the U.S. government is in $38 trillion in debt already, and it's not real comforting to think that the future of retirees hangs on the balance of an IOU from the total government to keep it going. So primarily, the Bible does teach that is responsibility of the children to the parents in old age, just like the Walton scenario. I think that's a great example. So instead of thinking in terms of everyone for themselves and, older people left to themselves, It should be the mentality, and the Bible teaches this, and we don't hear it enough in churches, and pastors don't teach it enough, but it should be the mentality that, hey, plan on a situation like the Waltons family, where you have multi-generations living under the same roof, saves money, it keeps everybody active, everybody has a chore to do, it gets us out of this false, fake idea of retirement where you just stop working and then you start goofing off and leisurely being on vacation for 20 or 2 decades or so until you eventually die. And that is not biblical, and that isn't even human, because you need some kind of active, productive thing to do. And in the Walton family situation, where Grandpa and Grandma were around the house, they were doing things, they were actually contributing to the whole family. Obviously, they slow down as they get older. They can't do as much as when they were younger, but that's part of the system there of a family supporting its people, and it's built right in. So, but even if they can't contribute very much, even if they're only contributing, say, a little bit here and there, as far as getting things done around the house and helping out, it's something, and they feel productive, and they're a part, and they actually are helping, and so it's healthier that way. So the family is the biblical model for retirement, if you want to call it that. Now, he talks about some of the things here. He says, for example, the family, not the government, the source of future security is the source of that means having lots of godly, hardworking children who love their family and carry responsibility. And I think we're actually going to see that kick in and implemented, because as the Social Security trust fund dwindles and the system becomes really dysfunctional, if it hasn't already, you're going to see more and more people being forced to turn back to the biblical model, which should have actually been something the government encouraged all along. But this Social Security system, and it is not a perfect system, it was implemented and people took it and actually distorted it. And that's where you get this sort of individualistic mentality where everybody's just getting money from the government directly in their old age, instead of encompassing that into a family-like situation. And it is the responsibility. He does point out, for example, it says in 1 Timothy 5:8, we are to provide for members of our family and of our relatives, otherwise we are worse than an unbeliever. That's what it actually teaches, that if you don't provide for your family, you're worse than an unbeliever. And it talks about that. Now, in the case of people who don't have a family structure, widows and orphans, then that is where the Christian community and the church provide charity for people who are not a part of their own family. So if you're a widow, if you're an orphan, if you're left outside of a family covering, then in the church community, these people are to be incorporated into the church community, whether that means joining a family, living with a family, or being supported in some kind of a church-related program, whether like in a church-related home or a church-related charitable monthly amount or whatever. We're supposed to provide for those people. But those people are supposed to be a small amount. because you're supposed to have a family structure and you're supposed to function within a family, which is healthier anyway than sort of the atomistic, individualistic American system where it is right now. So James Garlow is talking a really good sense program and plan. The only thing that I really have to say against what he's talking about is that he's treating the Social Security system as it is right now as an entitlement program, and it's not. It's a savings program. It's a pension program administered by the government, which we have all paid into. And that same way with Medicare, he talks about, for example, he says Social Security and Medicare make up more than 40% of the annual federal budget. That's probably higher right now. So he puts them together, Social Security and Medicare. You pay into Social Security out of your paycheck, and you pay into Medicare out of your paycheck. So you're actually putting into your own retirement, and you're putting into your own health insurance when you become eligible for Medicare. So again, that is not, strictly speaking, an entitlement program. Entitlement program, strictly speaking, would be food stamps, where you don't pay into food stamps from your paycheck, or Section 8 housing. You don't pay into Section 8 housing for your food, your housing. It doesn't come out of your paycheck. It comes out of somebody else's. So he's confusing entitlement programs with these two big Social Security and Medicare, which are non-entitlement programs, strictly speaking. But a lot of what he does say is valid, and we should listen to what he's talking about and begin to think in terms of family as the safety net for members who are elderly in the family, rather than government. And we also have to get away from that idea that retirement age is a time of leisure, vacation, free from any kind of productivity and responsibilities. And we need to get away from that. That there is nothing in the Bible that says that when you hit a certain age, then you can play the rest of your life. And that may be the thing that's actually breaking the system, where you have people with that kind of mentality. But the healthy mentality is that, look to the Waltons, for example, that show that I've mentioned again and again, where you have, and I believe that was before Social Security was enacted. So, Grandpa and Grandma Walton were not getting government checks. Most likely they were not. This was before that Social Security enacted. So they were part of the family. They did what they could, and there were enough children to cover the costs of Grandpa and Grandma. And there was family, there was community, there was assistance, there was help, and that's the biblical model. So we need to start looking in terms of trying to implement that in our lives and get away from this idea that the government is supposed to be there for us in our old age. The system hopefully will still exist, hopefully be administered better, but we should not lean on it as if that's the model that we should follow. Well, I hope that's been helpful in your thinking, and pray that things go well with the Social Security and with the elderly. God bless. We'll see you back next week.